Hi, I'm Chris Glover, the NDP critic for technology and innovation. Welcome to Tech Talks.
Welcome to Tech Talks. Tonight we have Ahmad Nassri with us, who's been working behind the scenes on a number of tech startups and companies that have gone from, he's gone from being a programmer to a developer to working with enterprises. So he's got quite a range of experience in the tech industry, particularly in Toronto. So welcome to Tech Talks, Ahmad. Why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me. Quick background. I came to Canada in 2005 as an immigrant from Syria. I've been working in tech ever since, kind of self-taught myself programming and working with software technology, and found a number of interesting tech challenges over the years, and working with, like you said, startups and enterprises. I kind of do this thing where I go from startup to enterprise and kind of cross-share the lessons and the structure from small to big businesses, and always help focus on developer experience and building developer culture within these companies. The type of work I do, I work in web and mobile and server-side technology, and helping mentor and lead the next generation of developers into building the next generation of tech startups.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Let's talk about the mentoring work that you do. I know you've got a group called Tech Masters. Tell us a little bit about Tech Masters.
I started Tech Masters, I think, over 6 years ago now, 7 years ago. I found this kind of pattern where, as I go from different companies and meet different people, there's a lot of folks who are, of the same mindset and building the same or similar technologies. And there's a lot of folks who are trying to get into the industry and learning about it and learning software development in general. And outside of the typical meetups and the conferences, there was no forum or space for people to constantly be in touch and share their learnings and their journey. So I kind of started Tech Masters as this kind of virtual group of people. Started like, I think, 10 or so people, has now grown to over 13,000 people across Canada and from around the world. And it basically represents software developers primarily, but project managers, founders, designers, UX folks, all working in the tech space, and sharing not just career advice, but sometimes like down to the level of debugging problems that somebody might be having with their code, as well as keeping a network of individuals connected and sharing their context, so that the next time there's a job opening or the next time there's an opportunity or something new to learn, Tech Masters is the place people go to first to kind of share that knowledge. Since then, we've also launched a number of conferences over the years, collaborated with other communities as well. We always kind of do these kind of nonprofit programs around learnings and conferences and tech events that just help the community in general.
One of the themes that I'm exploring in these tech talks is what is the role of government? And you talked earlier about, the Collision Conference, because that gets a lot of government support. What is the role of like Collision versus some of the smaller conferences that groups like Tech Masters are starting?
There's a lot of smaller scale events that happen that target either software developers or students getting into software, or product managers or UX designers that don't get to the same level of scale as these kind of multi-year conferences and conventions and events. Like you would expect to see maybe 400, 600 people, maximum you would see 1,000 people at events like that. And most of these events are run by nonprofit and or purely self-organized by individuals who would just go out of their way and do that effort and collaborate and work together on that. And I think those are very valuable, because those are the people on the ground level doing all the work, right?
Right.
I don't think the government shows up to all of those in any meaningful way. And I really wish that there's an avenue for engagement between not just the organizers, but showing, like, if the government kind of get involved in any particular shape or form in these kind of events, then folks like us who are on the ground level building the software, working on the technology, building the tech scene in Canada for the startup ecosystem, can see that there's a kind of like the government sees us and we see them, and we're in it together.
What else should the government be doing to nurture the tech ecosystem in Ontario?
Well, I'll draw from my own personal experience as well. I came to Canada as an immigrant, like I said, in 2005 from Syria. I did not have any educational background. I did not do any computer science studies or degree. I kind of did half a year university there. And then coming to the Canadian universities or even colleges, they wouldn't even take any of that experience as credits, and they would ask me to go back to high school. But I think there's a level of influence the government can have on businesses and companies in Canada. I'm not saying it's a structured approach that can be provided by the government, but potentially some influence, some encouragement, perhaps. The ability to do the work is there, and in fact, I've interviewed thousands of people in my career so far, hired hundreds. I can tell you from my own data, some of the best people I've worked with are people who are not academically trained or educated in computer science. They became the best software developers I've worked with.
Let's see. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is creating more investment, like creating a place in Ontario that attracts, or making Ontario a place that attracts investors, attracts entrepreneurs, and attracts talent. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think, I always can draw on my own personal experience and the people around me, the network around me. The biggest challenge right now for myself as an employer, I'm hiring people and continue to hire people for the past year and an ongoing year, even though despite the pandemic. The biggest challenge right now is Americans are coming, and they're coming hard and fast. It's the amount of dollars we're talking about in terms of not just investment, but taking people away, the salaries they're offering, make it extremely hard for Canadian companies to compete, extremely hard. Because it's easy for Google to come in and double your salary from what your expectations are. Your life cost is already lower than the US and California, right? Because that's their headquarters. Even if you're in Toronto, one of the most expensive cities in Canada, their life cost is already cheaper, and the Canadian dollar is not as competitive to them. So yeah, they'll double your salary, no problem. Where does that leave Canadian companies? And how does that happen in terms of influence? Because if I see my friend or my neighbor get a job in a US company at a much higher rate than I am, why would I stay at a Canadian company and keep my talent here?
How do we create major Canadian and keep major Canadian corporations in the tech sector?
About a year or two ago, most of the recent IPOs in the US were Canadian founders who went down south and started their companies there. Slack comes to mind as one of the big ones, right? There's a lot of Canadians down in the Valley. There's a lot of founders who have not only started their businesses and succeeded down there, but made hundreds of millions of dollars. We also have success stories in Canada that are still in Canada, like Shopify being a prime example of that, right? Many small to medium-sized companies who are successful and operating and growing and happily moving forward. But maybe it's a question of not how do we compete, because it's hard to catch up to where the Valley is and where that industry is. But how do we bring them back? How do we create incentives for those folks to come back and bring back their successes? Because they're not just going to come back with money. They're going to come back with the playbooks. They're going to come back with the blueprint. They're going to come back with the know-how, and they're going to come back with a community as well. So maybe it's less about competing, more about bringing back the talent that we lost and having that foster something here.
That's an interesting perspective. That's I think the start of a much longer conversation.
But the thing I enjoy the most and the thing I spend my time on the most is building that kind of like next generation of developer community and fostering a developer community so that those startups are finding the right talent to hire from and finding the right knowledge in Canada to lean on, as opposed to going south of the border. So the thing I'm spending most of my time on now, aside from being a fractional CTO to a number of startups, an advisor to a number of nonprofit organizations, is the Tech Masters community to kind of foster it and grow it as well. Because nobody else is going to do it. Might as well be me to do that.
That's great. You know what? I mean, thank you for your contribution here. It sounds it's a really interesting conversation, and it's a conversation that I haven't had in previous Tech Talks. So it's great to have you on board, and thank you so much for joining us, Ahmad.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow me on social media, and we'll see you next week for more Tech Talks.